Hello and welcome to another episode of Taking the Supply Chain Pulse. I'm Megan with St. Company, and we're glad you're with us. Today, Fred connects with Dr. Rubin Pillay, the Chief Innovation Officer at the University of Alabama at Birmingham. Together, they talk about the importance of thinking unreasonably to drive innovation, the role of technology in healthcare, what the next 50 years could look like, and the trends shaping what's ahead. It's a fun, thought-provoking conversation that explores what's possible when healthcare leaders dare to imagine a different future. Now here's your host, Fred Kranz.
Today, we have with us Dr. Rubin Pillay of the University of Alabama, Birmingham, who, among other titles that he possesses, includes the Chief Innovation Officer. Dr. Pillay, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Fred. Really appreciate being with you. Appreciate the invite. Yeah.
I didn't have enough paper to write down all the roles and titles. Could you tell the folks just a little bit about yourself and some of the roles you serve at UAB and other places?
Yeah. I wear many hats at UAB. My primary role is of course, I hold a professorship in medicine. I'm also assistant dean at the School of Medicine here at UAB, which incidentally is one of the largest academic medical centers in the country. I'm also Chief Innovation Officer of the UAB Health System. The UAB Health System is the fifth largest healthcare system in the USA. I'm also the executive director of the Heersink Institute for Biomedical Innovation, which is the home of our AI and digital technology operation within UAB. And what that means is we have a combination of academic programming. In fact, we currently are the world's largest academic training center for AI in medicine, which is a pretty big deal. We also have our own AI lab where we build solutions internally for the health system and the departments as well. So that's my formal job, which is, I would say spans a lot of different responsibilities, which actually I think contributes to the success of what we do. On a personal level, I frame myself more as somebody who works at the intersection of medical futurism, healthcare innovation, healthcare entrepreneurship, and technology and AI in healthcare. And I think, that kind of trinity helps us not just take a peek into the future, but helps us understand how to execute on that as well. So, yeah.
Great. We're going to get into a little bit of the futurism later. When I looked at your LinkedIn page, I saw this sort of thing behind you that said thinking unreasonably to drive innovation in healthcare. Can you tell us what that means?
Yeah. I mean, one of the quotes that I'm really fascinated by and something that I either open my keynote with or close it is a quotation by George Bernard Shaw. And George Bernard Shaw said that the reasonable man or woman adapts himself or herself to the world. The unreasonable man or woman adapts the world to him. Therefore, all progress comes from the unreasonable man or woman. And I think, that summarizes what healthcare needs. I think for too long, we have been a reasonable profession. And the reality is, if you look at where we have come as a profession, it's not very far in terms of outcomes, in terms of cost, in terms of quality access, and all of the metrics you use. So we really need a radical rethink of how things are done in healthcare. And the time has come for out of the box thinking. What I call is inverting the problems. Not taking traditional approaches to solving it because it's really not helping us. So that's what I mean by unreasonableness. I think we've got to adapt, the future to us. a lot of what happens in healthcare now is we're trying to fit into what the legacy that we've already built. So that in principle is why that has kind of been my mantra.
So you're espousing creative rather than linear or incremental thinking.
Yeah,
is that fair to say?
That's absolutely what it is. Yeah, absolutely.
So it's going to be the liberal arts free thinkers that are going to shape the world instead of the engineers.
Well, a combination, or at least, getting engineers to put on to see the world through a liberal arts lens, and getting the liberal arts folk to see the world through an engineering lens. I think that's what I'm trying to say is you cannot get a healthcare leader or healthcare professional to see healthcare through the lens of healthcare. And this is the problem with us. A lot of the challenges, Fred, that we face in healthcare have been solved by other industries.
Right.
So for other industries, what's reasonable would by default mean is unreasonable in healthcare. But that's the kind of approach we need to take.
Very, very, very true. So why don't you tell us, what are the major challenges that you think we face in healthcare that for sustainability, and paint the current picture of healthcare as you see it? So we have a starting point in this conversation.
So when you talk about sustainability, you mean about a sustainable healthcare system, or you're talking about sustainability from an eco point of view?
I'm talking about a sustainability healthcare system, one that will serve the population favorably instead of just transactionally.
Yeah, I mean that clearly that's not a simple singular answer. It's multifactorial. I think let's start with the key problems that we face, and they're huge problems. Access is a major issue that we have in healthcare. Cost is on an unsustainable trajectory. That's a major challenge. The quality of care and the data specifically regarding quality of care is pretty scary. If you look at outcomes, if you look at patient error, if you look at, deaths attributed to care, if you look at outcomes like maternal mortality, child, etc. If you look at all of these outcomes and quality metrics, they really don't reflect what I would call a high-performing industry. So we have all of these issues, and I think so. You can't attribute them to any particular reason. We require what I call a substantive business and operating model redo. If we're going to, the current business and operating model does not and will not address the challenges that we have. In fact, you could argue is, which something that was the ideal business and operating model for care in the 19th century doesn't work in the 21st century. So it worked then. And we have never changed that business and operating model in healthcare for centuries. In fact, prisons have evolved more in the last 2 centuries than the business and operating model of healthcare. And my take is we can't be tweaking healthcare at the edges, because the problems are so enormous that it's going to have to take a radical rethink, a radical redesign to achieve that. And we've never been, and this is kind of, what's exciting for me in the role that I play. We've never been better positioned to actually execute on that. Okay. Now, I buy it that we never had the ability to transform the business and operating model or change the systemic issues that we face, but we have it now. If we look at the technologies like artificial intelligence and digital technology and communication technology and sensor technology and biotech and all of these kind of technologies that are now available and that are, not expensive, by the way. They're all coming together now to create this kind of perfect window of opportunity for us to transform. So we now have. So the question is, are we going to take advantage of this opportunity? Are we going to capitalize on these drivers to transform healthcare? And I think it's time, as I say to healthcare leaders, the problem is very few people in healthcare take big swings at the challenges and problems that we have. They're all tweaking at the edges and making incremental changes, either to improve efficiency of a hospital, to become a better researcher, to publish, to win more funds. That's just not going to cut it. We've got to swing big and solve some of these big problems. We're seeing it happen, by the way, in other industries. Look at space travel. And look at what, Elon Musk is a classic example. Whatever you think of him, he's a classic example of somebody who swings big. And what happens at the end of that? You start becoming transformative. So he's a good example of unreasonable thinking. The fact that thinking that you can commoditize space travel was unreasonable when he first pitched the idea. But it's rapidly becoming mainstream. And you can argue from the time he set off on this path, within 2 decades, it becomes commoditized and transformative for society, not the industry, societal transformation, So what's it going to take? It's going to take policymakers and leaders who are prepared to take big swings. So.
Yeah, I was going to say, you got to want to, and every business in our country in my lifetime, wants to maintain the status quo instead of creating the future. And so I have to ask you this: do you think that healthcare leaders want to create the positive future, or do they, when I say sustainability, do they want to sustain the meager existence that they're eking out right now, as opposed to doing what you need to do to make things better?
Yeah, I'm not going to agree with you and say they're eking out an existence now. The reason they maintain the status quo, because it's more than eking out. I mean, if you look at the big players like insurance companies and some of the big health systems, they're not eking out. The status quo is designed for their economic gain. So, it's going to have to be individuals who really are purpose driven to do this. And one of the things, or one of the responsibilities I have as an academic, is to ensure people who pass through my school and my institute develop a more purpose-driven mindset. So they see the forest and not just the tree. And that's the kind of leader we need to cultivate now. When they see that more than half the world doesn't have access to care, and that's a problem worth solving. That's the big swing. Not just the patient with diabetes who's non-compliant. And, we just don't have enough of that in healthcare. And that's what it's going to take, Purpose-driven, unreasonable, take big swings.
This is an editorial remark, and you don't need to comment on it.
Yeah.
But I think that capitalism is a me-driven philosophy, and what you're talking about is a we-driven approach, and that's a different thing.
Absolutely. No, I agree with you. Yeah.
So two things. Number one, what approaches must be taken, and what role will technology play in building a positive future?
I think technology is the answer. Is the answer that we've been waiting for patiently. It is now here. The question is, do we have people or sufficient number, critical mass of people who have the vision that's purpose-driven to embrace the technology to make transformative change? Two, that's the first thing. Secondly is you can have the vision. If you don't have the resources allocated to that vision, if you don't have the appropriate organizational support, if you don't have the appropriate policy support, if you don't have the appropriate funding support, then of course it's really difficult to achieve. So I think one, we need people with these ambitious, purpose-driven visions. We need to support them from a policy framework. We need to support those from a organizational framework and resource framework as well. So, as I said, always come back to, space travel as a really good example of, an unreasonable vision that had the support either by individuals, but there was a lot of government backing in a policy space as well, to democratize access to space travel and not make it NASA-centric. So there was a lot of those back-end things going on to enable this. That's what we need in healthcare. Healthcare is over-regulated. That's the problem, And regulation and innovation and entrepreneurship don't go together. So we need to deregulate healthcare to enable this.
Before we dive back in, you may be asking yourself, is my supply chain future ready? At St. Company, we don't just optimize logistics, we engineer smarter, leaner, and more resilient systems from end to end. From manufacturing to retail to healthcare, our experts bring decades of experience and cutting-edge strategies to transform your operations. Visit and discover how we're shaping the future of supply chain one solution at a time.
Yeah, there's almost a sort of a contradictory thing there. Regulation ostensibly comes about because if you don't regulate, you're likely to get screwed. And left the thought being that left folks own devices, they're going to optimize for themselves and not take care of everyone else. But you're right, the regulation is phenomenal.
Yeah, because it's a double-edged sword, isn't it? You want to regulate to protect society, but on the other hand, the supply side capitalizes on the regulation to maintain monopolistic or oligopolistic behavior. So we have to radically rethink how we regulate. Yeah.
So let's get into your role as healthcare futurist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And I generally believe, just listening, that you probably have an optimistic viewpoint of the future. So tell us, this won't apply to me because I'm 80 years old, but tell me what healthcare will look like in 2050.
Yeah, I think it's for sure, it's not going to be what it is today. And technology is going to kind of radically reframe and redefine healthcare. We're kind of starting to see. I think if you're tracking the changes in healthcare at the moment, you're starting to see the kind of canary in the coal mine. Hints in terms of where it's going to. The first hint is a shift towards prosumerization of care, meaning that patients are now becoming producers of their own care. Okay, you're starting to see that. Not so long ago, you had to see a physician or a nurse to take a blood pressure, to get your blood glucose checked, to run basic, Today, technology has enabled patients to perform a lot of those functions. Okay, it's starting. So I coined the term prosumerization for that. So I think by 2050, prosumerization would be the primary business model. I think 70% of all healthcare will be delivered by individuals, and that will happen at home. So you could see the challenges that we face today in terms of cost being reduced to almost zero. Wait times are going to be reduced to almost zero. Exclusion rates are going to be reduced to almost. So all of the big challenges that we're grappling with today should be eliminated. And prosumerization, to me, is this vehicle to eliminating the challenges that we face. I think the other big shift that we're starting to see now is kind of automation. Medical automation is going to become mainstream. And you kind of see, you hear about robotics doing surgery with assisted by humans, etc. But this combination of robotics and artificial intelligence is going to transform the future of healthcare. Has consequences for the profession. But as a system, I think you're going to find a lot of services going to become automated. Automation ranges from ATM-like medicine to, autonomous robots doing surgery. And when automation kicks in, what happens? Productivity in healthcare goes up, and theoretically costs should come down. One of the reasons, Fred, that each one of us has 2 cell phones, 2 cars, and 2 of everything and 3 of everything is because those industries have automated, okay, and productivity has gone up. And productivity generally manifests itself in terms of quality of living, okay? Healthcare is unique, was unique in the sense that whenever you introduce a technology in healthcare, 2 things happen. Access goes down and costs go up. Okay? So somebody is skimming off that demonetization and deflation that should come with automation. But I think that's going to change. So that's going to be a huge shift in 2050. You're going to see a lot of automated care delivery. I think a lot of care is going to be what I call Uberized, or, well, today not even Uberized, Waymo-fied. It's essentially you'll be able to access care, AI-driven care, like you would an autonomous cab from anywhere in the globe and get real specialist quality healthcare. We're already building solutions here now that I think will be mainstreamed in the next decade, where you could have the most complex cancer, the most complex cardiology issue, irrespective. But, you could just access our platform from here and get the best level specialty diagnosis and treatment protocol within minutes. Okay? And that in a decade or so would be free. So it's, platformification of care, Waymoification, call it what you want. I think that's going to be, and you can see the impact of that from a cost, access, and quality point of view as well. I think you're going to see a huge shift in terms of a shift from sick care to well care. The current model, when you talk of healthcare today, you're in effect talking about a model built economically, operationally on illness. Okay. And, we now have this ability to collect data from individuals from the time they're born or even pre-birth to the time they die, which means that we can start now making that transition up the value chain in terms of life cycle to start identifying predispositions, predictors of illness and ill health very early on, and intervening really early on. Yeah, so we're going to see that. We're going to see science-based well care longevity become a big thing. And you could see that's going to result in the emergence of a whole new discipline that I'm, interventional preventive medicine, where we're going to start doing interventional surgeries to prevent, in some shape is happening at a very small scale today. You have some females who are at high risk of breast cancer doing preventive mastectomies. I think when we're able to, kind of start doing that from childhood and identifying high-risk individuals because they're genetically and environmentally predisposed, what preventive intervention would we have to take? Now, this could go to pre-birth because gene editing, CRISPR, which you probably heard of, which is pretty mainstream now. Gene editing is preventive surgery, but it's surgery at the level of the DNA.
Right.
Okay. So you're going to see that kind of emerge as a big change. I think on the provider side, the concept of a physician and a specialist will disappear. I think what you're going to find is I'm framing them now as omni-specialists or polymath physicians, because you really don't need a cardiologist and a nephrologist and a endocrinologist. Artificial intelligence can make a single physician a multi-specialist. Okay. And so they won't just have breadth, they'll have breadth and depth in every specialty. So essentially, this notion of specialties, etc., I think will disappear. I think if we look at the typology of hospitals for 2050, given everything I'm just talking about, and the fact that I think 70% of care is going to be delivered at home by patients. So what's the hospital system going to look like? I think in 2050, it's just going to be reserved for very acute care and interventional stuff, trauma surgery, surgical intervention, whether it's for treatment or prevention. I think that's one typology. I think hospitals of the future will be merely command centers. There'll be air traffic control centers where, folk located in there are managing this population that's out at home, distributing diagnostic tests, analyzing results, and working kind of as real air traffic controllers. So that's going to be the second typology. I think the third we're going to start seeing is centers come up with complex diagnostics. Today, I think in 2050, if you look at where material science is going, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, quantum, all of those things, we're going to have access to really, really, really sophisticated diagnostic technology that we can't even envision today. And they may be imaging, they may be biological. So you're going to have these very complex technologies located in the third typology, these diagnostic centers. And the fourth typology, I think, builds on the advances in biotechnology. And I think that's going to be regenerative medicine and longevity centers, where people are coming in for stem cell transplants. They're coming in for, genetic treatment, gene therapies, longevity kind of treatments, etc., which would be mainstream by then. So, yeah, that's to me is what it's going to look like.
Well, that's pretty optimistic. I mean, the one central thing though that you started off with that I've always been a big proponent of is wellcare versus sick care.
Yeah.
Our whole system is based on waiting till you have symptoms and then going to a hospital as
Right.
opposed to leading a life that avoids disease as much as possible.
Yeah.
So that being said, my next question is, let's
just kind of flesh that out a bit. I mean, I think,
okay.
So why have we not been able to pivot? And one of the reasons is we couldn't understand the economic model for wellcare. We have a pretty good sense of the economic model for sick care. How to bill, what to bill for, and how to do that. We've got that fleshed out. How do you bill for somebody who comes for, to stay healthy? So when I say business model needs to be disrupted, that's something I'm talking about as well.
Yep.
It is, what is the financial model that you're going to build to be able to remunerate folk who operate in the wellcare space? I think it's starting to evolve, and I think, we're certainly looking at some models here around. So once we really get a grasp on the financial models, because the current hospital system and healthcare sick care systems, their only survival strategy is going to pivot to become wellcare. So they're going to have to understand how to monetize wellcare. And so a lot of work has to be done in understanding that.
Yeah, and I would counter with that with the fact that this has societal impacts too. Wellcare means you're selling healthy lifestyle. So you're going to impact McDonald's. You're going to impact all the extremely profitable industries that create the problem, that contribute to creating the problem.
Yeah.
And they're going to fight you at every step of the way, I would imagine, because they want to keep making the big bucks. So I think that's going to be the daunting part of the challenge, is for people to understand that and willingly move toward that.
Yeah, but I think the one thing folk discount is the fact that the leaders of these corporates in 2 decades from now are the Gen Z folk today. Okay,
there you go.
So this generational shift in leadership is essentially part of this kind of collision of fortune that I think we're setting ourselves up to. I think when you look at future patient bases, they're going to be generation beta, generation alpha. They're tech savvy. They're really, they're going to hold our feet to the fire. But the great thing is they're going to be in leadership positions. They're going to be the dominant market. And if you're at McDonald's and you think you're going to survive with a Big Mac without lettuce and tomato options, you're going to be out of business. I can assure you about that. And I think that's what's going to help reshape healthcare as well. I make this a big deal. It is the generations in leadership in 2050 and your patient base in 2050 is as different as you can imagine from where we are today. And I can't wait for that. The generation.
That's the most optimistic thing you've said here, is the change in the worldview of the generations that are forthcoming. So just 2 more things before we go. Number one, you had given a talk at 2022 at Strategic Marketplace Initiative conference about the next big thing. And I wanted to ask you what the immediate next big thing in healthcare is. And finally, you talk about the idea of a chief artificial intelligence officer.
Yeah.
And tell us a little bit about that and what that role looks like. Those are my 2 last things to cover.
Yeah, I think the next big thing is here already. When I spoke about that in 2022, I was alluding to artificial intelligence. I think it's here. The next big thing for us is to deploy it at scale in a responsible way. We're far from that. So it's still kind of the next big thing, because it's all hype at the moment. Okay, we're trying to find our way. And so I think the ubiquitous deployment of AI at scale for clinical and non-clinical uses in health is something that I'm looking forward to. I still think we're about a decade away from that. That might, you might be surprised at that, but I think that's where we are. It's just because of the nature of this profession. But anyway, listen, it took Waymo 17 years from conception to being accepted. It took us in healthcare 30 years to accept hand washing as an evidence-based approach to reduce infection rate. Okay, so when I say I think we're still about a decade away, that's what I mean. In terms of the chief AI officer, yeah, I think it's a critical role that it's a leadership role. I mean, ultimately, we're going to have leaders who have not just the conceptual and technical understanding, but understanding the economics, the business related aspects of AI in healthcare and medicine. And that's a unique phenotype, with multiple skill levels. There are very few of these folk that are available. But I think it's going to become the next biggest position, and they would become an integral part of the C-suite of the future. What we have done is we have already launched a training program actually to develop this phenotype of CHAIOs. And the response to that is phenomenal. So one, the training is available, but of course there's a lead time before those guys become available. And in the interim, we're actually offering fractional CHAIO positions as well. So folk who have the phenotype and who have the skill set, you could use them for part of the time to help guide you. So everything starts and ends with leadership, Fred, as you know. So without having this transformational capacity and capability, we'll still be talking about, does hand washing work or not? I mean, that's my biggest fear is we let this window pass without leadership and policy and, thinking through business operating models, etc.
Well, Semmelweis was ahead of the curve. We know that with a hand wash.
Ironically, if you listen to his story, he was actually frowned upon by healthcare.
I know.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah, he ended up in an asylum, dying 30 years later of septicemia. So it's a poignant story of how we operate in healthcare.
Oh yeah, we have at least one president, Garfield, who died because of the fact that he was given prehistoric healthcare. No one washed their hands. The whole Civil War was cut off one guy's leg and go to the next one, and we don't do anything in between. So
yeah,
I was impressed when you pointed that out. But
I mean, so you think about it. If it took us 30 years to learn how to wash our hands or to accept that, we shouldn't have very high expectations in terms of the broad and wide scale acceptance of AI. That's my fear.
Very good. Well, Rubin, it's been great having you on the podcast.
Thank you,
and you have identified another topic that I'd like to get in with you on a future podcast, and that is when you talked about the generations that are becoming present. We have any given place usually has about 5 generations in it.
Yeah.
Each of which has a different worldview.
Right.
And I'd be interested to have a podcast where we discuss that in leadership and how you integrate those things into a package that works for everybody.
Absolutely. I mean, Fred, that's a fascinating topic. I actually wrote a blog on that a while ago, attributing a lot of the conflict within the healthcare space at the moment due to intergenerational rifts. Exactly what you're saying is when you have 3 or 4 different generations working in the same organization with different purposes and different missions and visions of how things should be done, you're going to get conflict, and it's not always creative conflict, So
right.
Yeah, but it's exciting. It's an exciting time. So yeah.
Well, thanks so much. You've elevated the level of conversation in our blog for this. You're way over my head, but I've tried to keep up.
No, you're great, Fred. Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate that.
Yep. And seriously, I want to get back again with the different generations of folks in the workplace, because I think that's a very valuable topic to be talking about.
And not just the workplace, it's also your customer base, your client base. Okay.
Yep.
Your client today is not going to be the same as it's not this passive consumer in 2050. So it's going to be fascinating because you got to look at both the supply side and the demand side and the generational impact of that.
Okay, Rubin. Well, thank you so much. It's been a pleasure having you here, and I hope to talk to you again soon.
Thank you, Fred. Thank you.
Take care. See you.
Pleasure to have you again.
Bye.
Well, that's all for today. Thanks so much for joining us, and don't forget to hit that subscribe button and connect with us online so you'll never miss an episode and can catch up on all the ones you might have missed. Got a topic you're fired up about, or maybe you want to be a guest on the show? Fred would love to hear from you. Just reach out at fcrans@stonge.com. We'll see you next time.